Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Badnock, and I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon's event as part of the Montana Book Festival. Thank you all for being here. James Lee Burke, a rare winner of 2 Edgar Awards and named Grand Master by the Mystery Writers of America, is the New York Times best-selling author of more than 30 novels and 2 collections of short stories. Award-winning journalist Gwen Florio has covered stories ranging from the shooting at Columbine High School and the Oklahoma City bombing trials to the glitz of the Miss America pageant and the more practical Miss Navajo contest, whose participants slaughter and cook a sheep. She's reported from Afghanistan, Iraq, and Somalia, as well as Lost Springs, Wyoming, population 3. She turned to fiction in 2013 with the publication of her first novel, Montana, which won the Pinkley Prize for the debut crime fiction and a High Plains Book Award. 4 more novels in the Lola Wicks crime series followed. Her most recent book is Silent Hearts, a novel of Afghanistan, published in 2018 by Atria. Florio is the executive editor of The Missoulian. Please welcome James Lee Burke and Gwen Florio.
Thank you. Thank you. So, is this on? Yes. Okay. No? Yes? Maybe. I'm just going to holler. I'm from the Philadelphia area. Better? Oh, okay. That was way too much about me. And so I want to talk a little bit more about Jim before we launch. A paragraph in his bio really caught my eye. He's taught in 4 universities, a community college, the Job Corps. He was also a caseworker in California with former felons, the indigent migrant farm workers, and the criminally insane. He was a pipeliner in Texas, a landman for Sinclair Oil, a surveyor in Colorado, a long-distance truck driver, and very last, after former felons and the criminally insane, a newspaper reporter. One of the great pleasures about working at the Missoulian is every so often Jim sends us a letter to the editor. His last one was a really spirited and typically eloquent defense of Job Corps. We get really excited when those letters come in because we get to read them first. However, we're here to talk about his newest book, the new Iberia Blues. He's going to do a little bit of a reading from that, and I hope his next one. And then we'll talk. He and I will talk, and you all and he will talk. So.
Well, thank you very much. Can you all hear me all right? Thank you, Ms. Gwen, and it's been a great pleasure and a distinction to be Ms. Gwen's friend. We met through our contact at the newspaper many years ago, but I always admired the courage with which she conducted herself. She never flinched, never blinked when she received terrible mail because she pursued the truth. I was a reporter as well. And the messenger, the media, news people are often blamed for stories that are true, but are not easy for some people to accept. And it takes guts. And it really takes the bravest people I've ever known are in news media. And they're battered all the time. The honest to God truth is that most media people are apolitical. A news reporter wants to file the story and go to lunch. He doesn't have an agenda. But anyway, it's great to be here, and thank you all for inviting me.
So you had mentioned, let's start with a short reading, if that's possible, because we all like to hear this, and then we get to talk about what he's read.
Okay, thank you. This book, titled The New Iberia Blues, was published earlier this year, and I brought here just a few pages of my new book, which I just finished yesterday. I started it in July of 2018. But the reason I brought these pages is because this book is part of a trilogy. Its predecessor is the eponymous titled Robichaux, and this is the second book in the trilogy. And the third one is, I just sent it to my editor yesterday, and he said, "You again?" Okay. This story is narrated by a police detective, a sometimes police detective named Dave Robichaux, who is really an everyman figure in this series of stories that are set in southern Louisiana, which is where I more or less grew up. Desmond Cormier's success story was an improbable one. Even among the many self-congratulatory rags to riches tales we tell ourselves in the ongoing saga of our green republic, one that is forever changing yet forever the same. A saga that also includes the graves of Shiloh and cinders from Aboriginal villages. This is not meant to be a cynical statement. Desmond's story was a piece of Americana, assuring us that wealth and a magical kingdom are available to the least of us, provided we do not awaken our penchant for breaking our heroes on a medieval wheel and revising them later, safely downwind from history. Desmond was not only born to privation in the sleeper of a semi in which his mother tied off the umbilical cord and said goodbye forever. He was nurtured by his impoverished grandparents on the Chitimacha Indian Reservation in the back room of a general store that was hardly more than an airless shack. It stood on a dirt road amid treeless farmland where shade and a cold soda pop on the store gallery were considered luxuries before the casino operators from New Jersey arrived and with the help of the state of Louisiana convinced large numbers of people that a vice is really a virtue. Like his grandparents, he belonged to that group of mixed blood Indians unkindly called redbones. His hair was cinnamon colored, more characteristic of Cajun women than of men. His skin was as smooth as clay, almost hairless, his eyes a washed out blue, and set too wide like those of someone with fetal alcohol syndrome. He was self-conscious about his racial background, as most of his people were, and smiled rarely, but when he did, he could light a room. I always had the sense that Desmond was trying to shrink inside his clothes, as though both fear and a great sadness lived inside him. Like Proteus blowing his wreathed horn, Desmond constantly created and recreated himself, perhaps never knowing who he was. No matter. Even as a little boy, he was not one to accept the world as it was, no more than he would accept the hand he'd been dealt. By the time he was 12, he seemed destined to remain skinny and frail and a carrier of intestinal worms and head lice. One morning, before his grandparents' general store, bare-chested under a white sun, his little body running with sweat, he roped a cinder block to each end of a broom handle and lifted, and kept lifting, and squeezing a rubber ball silently on the school bus, while the bigger boys laughed at him and often pushed him down on the gravel. By the time he was 14, he had the body and the latent animus of a man, and the boys who had bullied him now tried to ingratiate themselves with a weak, self-deprecating smile. He responded with the benign attention of someone watching a stranger blow soap bubbles until they bowed their heads and went silent, lest they provoke him. After high school, he waited tables in the French Quarter and became an apprentice to a sidewalk artist in Jackson Square and discovered that he was better than his teacher. Sometimes I would see him in the early a.m., disheveled, paint on his shirt and in his hair, eating beignets out of a paper bag and drinking café au lait from a styrofoam cup. On a particularly cold and gray January morning, I saw him hunched on an iron bench inside the fog by St. Louis Cathedral, like an unevolved creature from an earlier time. He was not wearing a coat, and his sleeves were rolled high up on his arms as though in defiance of the weather. He seemed melancholy, his insouciance a pretense for his loneliness, and I sat down beside him without being invited. The air smelled of the river, dead beetles in a storm sewer, the wine and beer cups in the gutters, damp soil and night-blooming flowers and lichen on stone. It was a smell like a Caribbean city rather than America. He told me he was going to Hollywood so he could become a film director. Don't you have to study to do that? I said. I already have, he replied. Where? He pointed a finger to his head. In here. I grinned good-naturedly but didn't speak. Don't believe me, huh? He said. What do I know? I replied. You still go to Mass? He said. Sure, I said. That means you believe in things that are on the other side of the physical world. That's what painting is. That's what making movies is. You enter a magical world others have no knowledge of. I got up from the bench. I felt old. My war wounds ached. The hardness of the bench was printed on my buttocks. I heard the Angelus ringing in the cathedral's tower, perhaps as a reminder of our mutability and ultimate fate. Good luck, I said. Kick some butt in California. There was a smear of powdered sugar on his cheek. For just a moment, I thought of a pauper child who might have ferreted his way into a bakery. He was smiling when he looked up at me. What's the joke? I asked. Anything you get with luck isn't worth owning, Dave. I thought you knew that. I didn't know if you wanted me to read these other 2 pages now or later or throw them away.
Under no circumstances do we want you to throw them away. Let's ask a couple questions about this. Let's talk about this for a little bit. Shortly after the passage he read, there is just an indelible section that involves the discovery of the body of a young woman. She had been a volunteer for the Innocence Project. She's on a cross floating in the sea. I looked at that image of innocents crucified, and I am probably projecting. But I wonder if you're thinking of the times we're in right now.
Oh, yes. No, the story is contemporaneous, the 3 books in this trilogy. And yeah, undoubtedly, I was born in the Depression. I knew Mr. McGovern, my wife and I, Pearl's here today. We knew Mr. McGovern pretty well. We were friends, and we were having dinner at his home. You know, he had a ranch outside of Stevensville, and he spent his last years there. But he was, he flew 35 missions over Nazi-occupied Europe. He had the Distinguished Flying Cross, and he was in the Kennedy White House, and he was talking about being with John Kennedy in 1961, and it suddenly struck me, and I stopped him, and I said, Mr. McGovern, you know, I was born in the first administration of Franklin Roosevelt, and in my lifetime, We have had presidents like FDR and Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower and John Kennedy. I said, what happened? And he looked at me just for about 5 or 6 seconds, and he said, Jim, that is the most depressing question anyone ever asked me.
The book is called The New Iberia Blues, and one of its more memorable characters is a blues singer named Della Hussey, which that name is just so evocative of the rhythm of Jim's words. As an aside, I notice when you're reading, you're tapping your foot a little. It's very musical. His language just kind of bowls me over all the time. So back to Bella. What's the importance of the blues in this book?
She's a great character. She's a musician from New Orleans and is playing in this juke joint in New Iberia. And she tries to explain to Dave what the blues really means. And actually, I got the idea from Lightnin' Hopkins. You remember Sam Lightnin' Hopkins? He was from Houston and used to play on a street corner there in the 5th Ward. So, largely people of color in that part of Houston. But he once said, and I'm just pulling this out of the air, but he said, the blues is when you lost your girl, you broke your heart. He said, but the blues is when you ain't got no other place to go. The blues means when you ain't got a door that you can walk in. You got to go to the back door of a man's house. And he said, there ain't no real way to describe it except when you sit down at the table and you can't even eat rice and gravy no more, you really got the blues. And I thought, jeez, you know. And it wasn't long. I used to work on a pipeline. My wife, Pearl, and I were first married in Houston. And I used to ride the bus to get with the crew downtown, and we would then go other places. But every morning, every afternoon, I'd ride the bus. And back then, this was the year 1960, everything was segregated there. And I was sitting right on the back of the bus, and there were 2 women of color sitting right behind me. And one said to the other, you know, when that sun goes down, it surely does get cold at night. And then it hit me. I said it was an iambic line. People of color in the South use the iambic foot. It's upbeat and downbeat in music, 1 syllable accent and 1 accent. Just think of it. St. Louis woman with all your diamond rings. Every other syllable is accent. And so it sounds like a racial cliche. It isn't. That people of color lived lives that were so bitter, the deprivation imposed upon them so severe. Look, I had a great aunt named my great aunt was named Pamela Suberville. And I don't mean to run on, but it's just, this bears on, and I'm not trying to be self-laudatory. This is about other people, not me. My grandfather was arguably the greatest lawyer in Louisiana ever. Nobody would contest the name of Walter Burke. He's a man of tremendous courage. And this is a fact. I don't know if y'all remember the name Huey Long, but Huey Long was a genuine fascist. He was really a bad guy. And and he was the predecessor of people like Joseph McCarthy and George Wallace. And there's another gentleman around that seems to have bought a page or 2 from him. But he was the original demagogue in denim. And he did a lot of damage to his enemies. He sent the state police to newspapers to just wreck the printing machines. Anyway, impeachment charges were filed against him. The night before the hearing, Huey sent the state police to the homes of the witnesses against him, one of whom was my grandfather, Walter Burke, who was a president of the Louisiana Senate at the time. But anyway, the state police did not go to my grandfather's house because they knew he would not be intimidated. And this joke, this was 1929. This joke is still told in Louisiana. People would say, when Huey Long walked into a room, everybody stood up. When Walter Burke walked into a room, Huey Long stood up. But anyway, his sister was named Pamela Burke Superville, and she was a grand lady. She was just absolutely wonderful person with a tremendous sense of humor. But in her last days, I went to see her on her deathbed, and these were her exact words to me. She said, "Jimmy, I fear for your generation because the white race has collectively committed a mortal sin against people of color, and you all are going to pay for it." Those were her exact words. Okay, she was a great lady. Anyway, the blues that we meet in this book is my attempt to encapsulate this view of the world. In other words, that tragedy, according to the Elizabethan attitude and according to the Greeks, involves a fall of a noble person from a position of power and strength into ultimately destruction. And so we never think, or normally we don't think of people of humble origins, of humble birth, who occupy, in literature at least, the role of the tragic hero. Instead, we have another term for it, pathos. It was borrowed from Aristotle. But in truth, people of color, like this woman, have the same Promethean dimensions. William Faulkner said that about the black woman named Mammy, who was born in 1840 in Mississippi, died in 1940. And he left her something for her son in his will. But he had this tremendous admiration for her strength, and she's one of the central figures in his novel, The Sound and Fury. In fact, the last quarter of the book is seen through her eyes, the events. It's a masterpiece. But the story's not over, though. You know, Ernest Gaines is somebody I have enormous reverence for Ernest, and he's a fine fellow as well. The best book I have ever read on America in English regarding the relationships between people of color and white people is Of Love and Dust by Ernest Gaines. It is a masterpiece. I don't know why it's better than anything James Baldwin wrote. James Baldwin's a great writer. I'm not taking from him. Ernest Gaines wrote the perfect book of Love and Dust. If you read it, you start the first page, you won't stop, and you'll never forget that book the rest of your life.
I see people taking out their phones and someone would email that to me too, because that's what I usually do. And you know, an hour from now I'm going to go, what? Another character who's equally memorable in a very different way, one of my favorite antagonists in forever, Chester Wimple, smiling. The man is practically ectoplasm. I want to know from what deep, deep, dark recesses of your psyche Smiley arose.
Okay, thank you. I love Smiley. His name is, Chester Smiley Wimple. He looks like his name, but he is the best villain I have written about. And the funny thing is, my daughter Pamela runs a website, and it's like a book club. But everyone that writes in about Smiley says that people have asked me to make Smiley buttons. You know, Smiley is Smiley is coming to, one guy said, how about this? Smiley is coming to your town next.
That is terrifying.
He's a great guy, and everyone who looks at him describes him in the books. They say there was this fellow here, he's a cuddly little guy. This is the most dangerous person on the planet. And nobody knows it until it's too late. And he hates the kind of people who really have it coming. In the sequel, that's in this book, Smiley gets hold of a flamethrower. And I won't tell you anything. I don't want to ruin your day. You know, every high school has a certain kind of persona. There's always one guy like Clete Purcell, Dave Robichaux's friend. Every high school has a guy like Smiley, and you use him like you would a gun. You point people and say, you point him at the Antichrist, and the Antichrist would lose.
Well, when I came across him in this book, I was thrilled. Equal parts thrilled and like, oh God, now what? I am probably going to fear ice cream trucks for the rest of my life.
Yeah, Smiley drives an ice cream truck.
Don't buy the ice cream. He is a really terrific character. However, as you said, he is, despite his looks, not a warm and fuzzy individual. Not just the violence that Smiley perpetrates, but your books go into violence in very specific detail. Both fictional and you bring in real things that have happened. And I wonder how to sleep at night sometimes. Does it stay with you? Are you able to, when you put the pen down at the end of the day, you're done with it?
Well, I never wrote, I know what you mean. I never wrote, though, I believe, anything that I couldn't defend, that I either didn't see or hear about, or in one way or another, I wouldn't have to reach for it to explain where the story came from. But the real challenge in writing violence is with profanity and some of the things that just offend the sensibilities, is to do it with three cushion shots. That was the term Ernest Hemingway used for it. And that most of it is after the fact. The real challenge is to write a violent scene without actually writing the violent scene. You do it through suggestion. And I learned that in high school from a speech teacher I had named Mr. Miller. He was just, I learned more from Mr. Miller in high school than I ever learned from any teacher in my life. Anyway, he used to say that you let the imagination work for you. And then he challenged the class. One day he brought in Willa Cather's My Antonia. And he said, I'm going to read you a scene. And he said, just listen to the words, close your eyes, but do not watch me turn the pages. And so he read this account of the wedding the couple in a sled who are driving through the snow after the wedding, and they're attacked by wolves. And it's horrifying. And you can hardly finish reading it or listening to it. And then Mr. Miller closed the book, and we were juniors in high school, and we were horrified. And he said, how long do you think that description was? And we guessed 20 pages, 30 pages, all over the map, but in double digits. And he said 2 pages. That was it. I never forgot that lesson. A good storyteller does it with 3 cushion shots. But you never forget that scene in My Antonia. I used to teach occasionally medieval literature, and I used to tell the class, I said, you may forget everything else you read in a college lit class, but you will never forget The Miller's Tale by Geoffrey Chaucer. And they would all look really curious, and then when they came back right after reading the assignment, their heads were still, you never forget The Miller's Tale. That's one of the tales in the Canterbury Tales. But that's what a good writer does. It's not volume. You just get it, turn it down, turn it down, turn it down until you get white noise.
I think I read The Miller's Tale in high school specifically because we had a very proper English teacher, and I knew if I said that was the one I'd read, she wouldn't call on me. I was in fear of being called on. It's memorable for all kinds of reasons. Your books deal over and over again with evil. I think a lot of people either find evil a quaint concept, or they don't want to deal with it, but you come right out and call it what it is. You want to talk about that?
Well, yes, and it's funny you chose that subject, because the book I just finished, and I brought the 2 or 3 introductory pages to it, is based on an inquiry of the self about the origins or the pathological origins of certain kinds of human behavior. And Dave Robichaud goes to Huntsville, Penn in Texas to interview a man who turns out to be his half-brother, but a man who has all the characteristics of a sociopath. And the worst characters in my book, the sociopaths, are cut out of different cloth. That's what Dave Robichaud comes to believe. And the other books I've written deal with the same question. What are the origins of evil? Well, I think in all of the books that there's a conclusion about the sociopath. Namely, we do not know what goes on inside of them, because they take their secrets with them. They never disclose their secrets. When Bundy died, he could have given peace to some of the families of his victims, but he took the knowledge of where the remains are with him and why, and how is a person like this created? Is it behavioral? Is it genetic? And I think most psychiatrists who have dealt with them say, no, they're evil, and we don't know where it comes from. It doesn't, the causality explanations like, childhood trauma, yeah, those things can be influences, but it still doesn't, it just doesn't add up. And there's something that is not there. It's just not there, and I don't know, they're frightening. I was a caseworker with inmates who had been in Folsom, Quentin, Vacaville, Soledad, but this is what you learn quickly about recidivists. They're not different from the rest of us. They're dysfunctional mostly. They have banana peels for fingers. They mess up everything they touch. But they're just kind of people, if you turn the screw just a little bit, they're okay. In their culture, inside institutions, sociopaths are dealt with just as we deal with them, by avoidance. But I don't know, but I didn't mean to complicate the issue. The real fact, though, is that the great harm in the world that is done most of the time is done with consent of the multitudes, and it is done with sanction. And as Dave Robichaud said, he's never turned the key on a slumlord or a man on a zoning board who takes bribes, or people who do injury to the poor, who cheat the poor, who don't pay people a living wage. and he's never in his life ever heard of a rich man being executed. And so who ultimately does the most damage? I knew politicians that I think just did enormous injury to other people, absolutely worthless human beings. I wanted to go take a shower, after that's kind of strong. No, it's exactly, it's not strong, it's kind. Look, can I tell you this? Okay, all right. There was an infamous Southern senator. He was the flagship of segregation, but he was a man who had enormous power. He was chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee during the time that Richard Nixon was running for president in 1968. It was he who forced Nixon to take Agnew as his running mate in order to get the endorsement of this senator, a very powerful man, ran on the Dixiecrat ticket in 1948. Anyway, I was just a young boy then, but I sold tickets to his barbecue one night, and I've carried that sin all these years. Anyway, I was teaching at a college in the Midwest, and he was a guest of we had a forum board, our honors committee, that invited unusual speakers. We had Alger Hiss. In fact, I had breakfast with Alger Hiss one morning. But anyway, I said, I'm going to, as part of my penance, I'm going to go have breakfast with this fellow who, at the time, I had breakfast with, there were a bunch of us in that. He was head of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Now, this is a literal quote. Now, most what I heard him talk about was condemnation of people on welfare and what he called, and this is how he sounded. He didn't talk. He shouted with gritted teeth. The media! That's the way he said it. And this is the quote. Why, the media, they obsessive. When John Kennedy was killed, that's all they talked about for days. For days. That's a low quote. Okay. I had gone there that morning to meet Satan, and you end up talking to Elmer Fudd. And how do you get mad at somebody who has an IQ of like yesterday's melted ice cream? There's just nothing there. And I think every reporter will tell you this. You meet the guys that are running things, I mean people with tremendous power, and then you're stunned because you're talking to a closet full of moths. You go offer prayers and burn candles at your church with this guy. I remember there was a fellow who was in Alabama. This is 1964. I was interviewing him, and I went back home and I told Pearl, I said, I kept looking at this guy, and then the guy finally asked me, he said, Mr. Burke, you're looking at me in a very peculiar fashion. I said, oh, I'm sorry, I have a headache today, I apologize. But I kept seeing a cracked flower pot. I don't know why. It was like a cracked flower pot full of dirt sitting on a pair of shoulders. Look, Paul will back me up on this. We have a close friend, a guy that comes from Chesapeake Yacht Club Society, very wealthy family in Baltimore. We've been friends for 50 years. Anyway, he used to tell me, he said, Jim, if most people could see who was running the country, we would have a Bolshevik revolution. And then he started telling me these stories. He said, the Beltway is and all the centers of power are. He said, my friend, his name was Frank Frank said all these people would come to the yacht club on the weekends and they'd check in about 7 in the evening. And he said by midnight they'd be running naked through the halls, having fights with seltzer bottles, drunk out of their minds. And then he showed me a scar on his hand. He said, "You see this?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "This was." He said, "We had a white tie, or what is it? Summer Tux dance." He said, "Had a big orchestra there, and then a fist fight started at the buffet table, and it spread all over the club. And my friend punched some guy in the mouth, went in to wash his hand in the washroom, and a tooth was sticking out at the top of his finger. And he said, 'That was just a warm-up.'" And he said, "These are people from the Pentagon, from the most powerful international conglomerates in the world." And he said they bring their physicians in on Sunday morning to shoot them up with vitamins and speed so they can go back to Washington and start running the country Monday morning. That's just minor. He used to call it the the Bears of Caracalla in Baltimore, Maryland. He's kind of a cynical guy.
Are we all deeply reassured that
There's an election coming.
So from the deep discussion of evil, a somewhat trivial question. However, I have to ask this because two of my favorite characters are Tripod and then Monty Coon. I grew up on a wildlife refuge and as part of that raised several baby raccoons, and I'm wondering, have you had a raccoon as a friend wandering in and out of your house?
Well, not in the house, but they get into things. But yeah, more or less. And even up here, up Grant Creek, Pamela, my daughter, had two cats named Oliver and Stanley, named for the comedians. But these two raccoons used to come almost every evening and they'd scratch on the sliding door. And the big tabby cat, this big orange fellow, would go out with them. And there was another animal, we used to call him baby Igor's, a 300-pound black bear. And he would come down with the coons, and the two raccoons and baby Igor and Oliver would all go down to the creek together. And Oliver would come in about 2 in the morning, and he'd smell just like a barn. And I never saw anything like it. But they raccoons tame real quickly. But Tripod in the Robot Show series is a great little guy.
I'm hoping Monty is going to come back in this next book.
This book is set back quite a few years, so Tripod is in this. Tripod's in this one.
As long as one of them's in there, I feel it's very weird. Speaking of the next book, that's a kind of a clumsy segue, but I'd love to hear it. It's a good time. Yeah.
And pardon in advance if there's some profanity in here. Okay, jeez. All right, hang on. Okay, this story is set back about, I don't give a date, but it's just before 9/11. But so in the book, there's no reference to 9/11, but this is how it begins. You know how it is when you've kicked around the globe too long and scorched your grits too many times with 4 fingers of Jack in a mug and a beer back, or with any other kind of flat juice that was handy. And if that wasn't enough, maybe doubling down in the morning with a half-dozen tall glasses of crushed ice and cherries and sliced oranges and vodka to drive the snakes and the spiders back into the basement. Wow, what a gas. Who thought we'd ever die? But why get into all that jazz? I'll tell you why. I'm talking about those moments when you strip your gears, and whether you're chemically loaded or not, and get lost inside the immensity of creation and see too deeply into our ephemerality and our penchant for greed and war and willingness to destroy the big marble. And for a brief moment, you scare yourself so badly, you wonder why you didn't park your porridge on the ceiling a long time ago. The kind of moment came to me once when I was standing on a Texas dock in the sunset while the waves rolled below me and thudded as hard as lead under the pilings. And incandescent spray blowing as cool as refrigeration on my clothes and skin, a green gold light as bright as an acetylene torch in the clouds, the amusement pier ringing with calliope music and popping of shooting galleries. It was one of those moments when you hang between life and death and ache to hold on to the earth and eternity at the same time, regretting all those days and nights you pitched over the gunwales while you deconstructed your life. I'm talking about the acknowledgement of mortality, and not the kind that slips up on you in a hospice or a battlefield filled with the cawing of carrion birds, or by way of a drunk driver bouncing over a curb into a playground. I'm talking about seeing the seventh seal at work and a string of medieval serfs and liege lords and virginal maidens wending their way across a hilltop to a valley dark as oil, their silhouettes blowing like pieces of carbon in the wind. The people who have these moments of metaphysical clarity are what I call members of the 3% Club, because in my opinion, that's approximately the percentage of people who fry a couple of their lobes and are able to talk about it later. You can pay your dues in lots of ways. On a night trail sprinkled with Chinese toe poppers and booby-trapped 105 duds, or stacking time on the hard road, or kneeling on a hard floor in a convent with a rosary twisted around your knuckles, or listening to voices in your head that are as loud as megaphones. The surroundings don't matter. You're in a black box for the duration, Jason. You literally sweat blood, bud, to say it's a motherfucker doesn't come close. After you're through with the long ride of the soul, or after it's through with you, you're never the same. Earthly fears disappear like a great weight removed from a scale. You have no inclination to argue or hold grudges. Reticence becomes a way of life. It's hard to stay awake during an average conversation. The downside is you're on your own, the only occupant in a cathedral in which you can hear your heartbeat echoing off the walls. What does this all have to do with Johnny Shandell? I'll tell you. He was out of another era, even though he was more symbolic of it than part of it. An era we always want to resurrect, whether we admit it or not. Jesus talked about people who are made different in the womb. I'll take that a step further. Maybe some people were never in the womb. They arrive inside a golden bubble and somehow become the symbol for the rest of us. At least that's how I thought of Johnny and the Solby. Call it a scam or a sham or the stupidity of the herd, who cares? The only reality you have is the one you believe in. I say 86, the rest of it. Back in that other era, America was still America, for good or bad. Men such as Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower were president. We didn't have the daily arrival of the clown car. People can say that's just nostalgia talking. They're wrong. For us in Louisiana, it was a time of music and drive-in movies and starry skies and two-lane roads that meandered for miles through meadows and oak trees hung with Spanish moss. If you don't believe me, ask my friend Clete Purcell. He'll tell you about it. I can almost hear him now. It was deeply copacetic, nobleman. You can take that to the shack, Jack. I wouldn't give you the slide, Clyde.
Every time I listen to Jim read, I feel like I'm getting a master class on how to write. That's how it's done. I'm sure you all have questions. If anyone wants to ask, what I'll do is I'll repeat the question so everybody hears and the camera hears. And yes, Ray.
I wonder if the senator you were referring to so colorfully a minute ago was James Eastland.
No.
I wondered, strong Thurman.
I don't want to denigrate people. They were men of their era, and they all. I'm glad you brought up Mr. Senator Eastland, though. Here's the irony about these men, and they were all the demagogues in Denham, but they were educated. And they were intelligent people, and they were all fundamentalists. They grew up in the Assembly of God and First Baptist Church and Church of Christ. They believed that they knew what was waiting for them. Every one of them, before his death, apologized publicly. George Wallace did, so did Barnett. You remember Governor Barnett of Mississippi, Faubus of Arkansas, Strom Thurmond, every one of them before he died denounced himself. They were scared to death. That's a fact. The Assembly, I don't know if you're familiar with the Assembly of God. I'm not making comment on the religion, but instead the culture that accompanies it. Elvis belonged to the Assembly of God. Jerry Lee Lewis did. Mickey Gilley, Jerry Lee's double first cousin. Jerry Lee is Swiggert's double first cousin. His family's a little bit close. Xenophobic down there. Yeah, do you remember the governor of Louisiana, Edmund Edwards, said when he went to prison? Someone said, I think he quoted somebody else and did addendum. He said, half of Louisiana is underwater, the other half is under indictment. And then he added, well, it's no big deal, we're all related.
So as a reporter, Louisiana is one of the great states to work in. I've had the pleasure of working in New Jersey, Philadelphia, also just gold mines for news, depressing news, but nonetheless, you're never bored. Chicago would be another place. Some of these places are legendary, and another reason I enjoy these books so much, I think. Anyone else? Yes?
Dave Robichaud has this meetings at times with spirit world, like Civil War soldiers that he sees, in the swamp, mist and stuff. Where did that come from?
Oh, did everybody hear that question? About Dave Robichaud's meetings with the sort of the ethereal Civil War soldiers in the swamps, and where does that come from? I'm very curious about it.
Well, my father was something of a historian, and he had a theory that all time happens at once. He did not believe that time was sequential. And my father was a very intelligent man, But he believed that there were perchers in the dimension, and that's how we see things sometimes. I share his feelings. I think that probably, my father used to say, time is nothing more but a dream inside the mind of God. And he used to add, he says, Jim, as you grow up, you will hear people tell you what God is and what he is not. There are only two things you have to remember. My father could read from a telephone book and turn it into a Petrarchan sonnet. You ever hear the accent of Robert Penwarn, or the recorded voice of William Faulkner, or Mr. Anyway, any of those guys. My father had that saying, it's called plantation English, but he said, the only two things you have to remember about the nature of God, he said, he has a sense of humor, and number two, he's a gentleman, and as such, he always keeps his word. That's great. He said, that's all you need. He said, just don't look back on it. Anyway, but what were we talking about?
The spirit world, the Civil War soldiers that.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Up in the books.
Yeah, those scenes occur in the novel In the Electric Mist with Confederate dead. And here's the peculiarity. I used these ghosts, the specters here, as part of the Arthurian tale. You know, Arthur promises to come back when his country needs him again. And I used, instead of King Arthur, General John Bell Hood, you know, he's a tremendous figure during the Civil War, and was the kind of fellow that never quit. But anyway, I set the scenes, the ghost scenes, there on Spanish Lake in New Iberia, and it was only a few years after I published the book that I discovered there was a Confederate camp right where I put it in the book. And it was after the fact. And I've never been able quite to explain it. I've had one supernatural experience of my life, and it was the real deal. And I don't talk about it, and I don't care if anybody believes it or not, but I have never doubted the presence of the dead in our lives. I know what was said and who was there. And I don't think I'm schizophrenic, but anyway. Anyway, Ms. Gwen brought up a really important issue about the backdrop of a story. Louisiana is a gift from God to the artist, to the writer. It's not accident that everybody of an eccentric nature ends up in New Orleans. Tennessee Williams loved it. I mean, and he was born in Mississippi. And half of Mississippi comes into New Orleans at Mardi Gras time. People used to say in New Orleans, the barbarians are at the gates. Because you see, those are all dry counties over there, boy. Anyway, but it's a great place for eccentricity. It's very, New Orleans and San Francisco have much in common. You cannot shock people. It is impossible. But anyway, it's not, it's not really part of the traditional South. It was a Caribbean culture. It still is today. And it's a grand place to live, and the people are wonderful. But it's under stress. It shares many things in common with Montana. The issue is natural resources, extractive resources. That's the issue. Dave Robichaud says, wars of enormous importance are fought in places no one cares about. It's like a proxy war, but and the issue is, in terms of the people that are interested in extractive resources, is precedent. If they can get into the Grand Canyon, if they can get into the tundra in Alaska, which they are doing now, if they can get rid of the Endangered Species Act, they set precedent. They don't care what's down there now. They need to get restrictive and regulatory laws out of the way. And that's what it's about. Everybody in the oil business knows it. I'm not knocking them, it's just the way it is. But they'll be the first to tell you that. The Endangered Species Act is one that they despise because it's ironclad. If you can prove that something is actually endangered in a certain area, then no one can drill or tear up the surface of the countryside.
Actually, that brings up a question I didn't get to, but I'm curious about, because you said before of New Iberia, the past is visibly present there. I know you're not from here, but do you have that same sense in Montana at all?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Montana is a glorious place, and Pearl and I and our children came here in 1966. We were pulling a U-Haul trailer behind our station wagon, and when we came through Hellgate Canyon, I told Pearl, I said, well, I'm going to kick the bucket here. This is it. But that's it. It's like a drug. You know what Steinbeck said? Montana is not a state, it's a love affair. It's a great line, but that's it. It's a magical place. There's no other place like it. And it's all free. Just get up in the morning and just look around. You say, my God, I live here. I think people who don't like Montana should be, locked away somewhere. There's something wrong with them. That's it. I would kind of spread rumors. The people are terrible. There's toxins in the water.
Other questions? Yes.
I have one now, since you mentioned Montana finally. Are Dave and Pete ever going to come back up here again? And what about anybody like Mr. Dixon?
Oh, okay, Wyatt Dixon.
Wyatt Dixon, my personal favorite of your anti-heroes.
He's a great villain and a very interesting guy. The lady is talking about a character who appears in several of the Holland family novels that I've written, and in one of the Dave Robichaux novels, The Light of the World. But I don't know about Wyatt, so he's been kind of quiet for a while. But he's a Texas cowboy and a psychopath, but a really kind of likable psychopath.
Anybody else? Yes.
I think that one of the things that's best is heroes you can make up almost every day. It's a good villain that makes the show.
It's a good
Villain.
villain?
Villain.
Oh, villain, okay, yeah, oh, I think so. And I think it's part of the British tradition. The British are the most law-abiding, civilized people on earth, at least, in the island, in the British Isles they are. Overseas, the empire, maybe that was something else, but they love their villains. They're all, there are many British folk ballads about their villains, and George Orwell talks about that. It's a kind of a secret pleasure venerating, bad guys. But Americans are the same way. We lionize our outlaws, and I just watched Tombstone again last night. Isn't that a great? Well, golly, it's maybe the best portrayal of the Earp family. And the most accurate, but the reality of many of our Western heroes is, secretly, probably most of them, they wore badges, but they weren't much different from the guys that they were hunting down. But I guess it's just the tradition of Robin Hood. We want to believe that the folk hero, the villain on the side of the poor. The only reason they don't rob the poor is the poor don't have any money. You remember Willie Sutton's great response when someone asked him, why was a man like Willie, you remember he was a famous safecracker, why did he rob banks? And he said, that's where all the money is.
You seem to really enjoy the human condition and the humor, and that's what I just enjoy. That's why I like to listen to you talk. So, do you, when you're writing, you just break out in uproarious laughter?
Sometimes, yeah. But you raise a good question. A good writer is a good listener because it's all out there. You'll hear it. Just like I was talking about the two women on the bus in Houston, and I learned a lesson about writing from them. But that's it. It's observation and listening that's most important, I think. And did you ever see the film The Graduate with Dustin Hoffman? He walks into a hotel and he opens a door for a lady, and then he can't let go of the door because other people just keep walking in. But just that one little moment makes you think, wow, okay, what does that say about people's focus? Well, the answer is they don't have any. That's what it is. Just it's like freezing the frame, on a camera. George Orwell, in an essay called "Why I Write," talks about the compulsion to write. He said it's a vanity. Every artist, doesn't matter his medium, every artist believes that he has a piece of truth and understands it the way no one else does, and he feels compelled to tell it. And nothing can prevent him from doing that. And I used to teach creative writing, and sometimes a student would say, hey, Jim, do you think I got it? I got the talent. And I'd never answer. I'd shine him on. I mean, just not say very much. But it's a wrong question. That a writer, an artist, doesn't care what other people think. It's a vanity again, and everyone knows, everyone in the arts knows that he did not acquire the talent. It came to him from some source outside of himself. And once he takes credit for it, it will be taken away from him. I have never seen the exception, and I never have known a real artist who would argue with that statement. And did you ever see Amadeus, the film, great story about Mozart and his rivalry with Salieri? Salieri, I guess, despised Mozart because Mozart was a buffoon. There's his enormous talent. And Salieri worked so hard at his craft and he couldn't come close to Mozart, I guess. Anyway, that's the story. But here are the things that occurred in their relationship. Salieri knew that Mozart was far more talented than he, but he had put together this sonata, and he went to a party where Mozart was and gave the sheet music to Mozart and said, you were the first person to look at my new composition. I wanted you to play it first. And Mozart looks at it and then took off his shoes and played it on the piano with his toes. And Salieri didn't learn his lesson the first time around. He had a performance scheduled for the King of Austria, and he needed copies of the music to give to the other people, I guess, on the platform of the orchestra. And so he asked Mozart to make the copies of the music. Well, Mozart didn't deliver the copies until 5 minutes before the performance. and he used 6 different colored pencils to write the notes. So it was like camouflage. And it was a disaster. And Salieri was booed off the stage in front of the King of Austria. But that's it. That's it. I mean, think of it. You look at a guy like Charlie Chaplin, becomes one of the richest people in the world. How does that happen?
God has a sense of humor.
That's it. That's it. Look. I don't know why he gets mad at me for telling this one, but it's a true story. I was teaching a graduate class, MFA class in a Midwestern school, college, and I'd taken a break, and this fellow he was a journalist traveling around interviewing crime writers, so he happened to be there while I was teaching this seminar. So seminar was taking a break, I was in the office, and I won't use this other author's name. Okay, he had just interviewed this famous crime writer who's very successful, and most of his work has been turned into great motion pictures. Anyway, I said, by the way, you know, I saw this fellow, or maybe even talked to him at the Edgar Awards and Mystery Writers of America conference. And I've often wondered, where did he go to school? And my British friend said, well, actually, he never went to one. What do you mean? So he quit school, I think, when he was 10 years old. I said, what kind of work has he done? Well, he didn't do that either. He was a part-time golf caddy in a petty theft. And said, that guy never went to school, never had a real job, it was a career petty thief. And he said, that's it. And I said, what if I go back here and tell these MFA students? This is how I make the big score. Make a living breaking open parking meters and carrying people's golf clubs. That's a true story. And the guy's a very good writer. He's a very good writer. He has no education. William Faulkner went to the 5th grade. That's right. It's very depressing.
Although you went many, many years
Yeah.
without publishing something, and I'm wondering what kept you going?
Well, I owe a great deal to my family, Pearl and the kids, and we lived and worked everywhere. I mean, from California to Florida, East Coast to West Coast, and did every kind of job. But I was very fortunate to meet some very good people, and I finished my first novel, Half of Paradise. I finished writing it on a pipeline. And that was 1960, and it took 5 years to get it in print. But I received a 6-column banner headline review in the New York Times, and I thought, boy, this is great, you know. Well, I found out I'm going to have to wait a while before I get another one like that. But I published 3 novels when I was quite young, and they were they had a very good critical reception. But I wrote my 4th book, and it was called The Lost Get Back Boogie, and boy, it was turned down by everyone. This is a fact. It is well known in New York as the most rejected novel in the history of American publishing. 111 rejections, that's right. It was under submission for 9 years, I mean, for constant submission. And so I went 13 years in the middle of my career out of hardback print. And I don't know how many stories I wrote. I wrote other novels that had never been published. And, but I learned a lesson. Never leave a manuscript at home more than 36 hours. You recycle it. You just wear them. I call it Richard Nixon syndrome. You just keep hanging around. It's just, give the guy the White House, for God's sake. Shut him up. But after 9 years, Pearl kept saying, send it to Louisiana State University Press. And I finally did that, and they published it. It was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize, and it's published today all over the world. That's a fact. And, but it was, those were long years. But what you learn is you do it a day at a time. And if you write to make money or to acquire fame, it'll never happen. And you have to write and be, I think, confident that there's a reason for a gift. And as I say, it comes from outside a person. It's not something you can go out and find. It finds you. I've always thought of it as, remember the recruitment poster with Uncle Sam? Say, I want you, as a World War II poster you'd see all over town. But that's it. It's just like somebody points a finger at you, and you don't care whether people like it or not. And you just, and you take joy, you know, well, you do care if they like it, but if people don't like it. Jack Kerouac wrote real well right before his death. This was in St. Petersburg in 1968. A reporter there asked him which writers he liked and which might he not like. And he said, oh, I like them all. He said, if an artist invests himself in his art, if he's true to the gift that God has given him, he said, eventually that gift and the reason for it will become manifest in his life. And I've never forgotten that statement. Kerouac was a great writer. He was destroyed by his addictions. He was only 47 when he died. But On the Road, I think, is one of America's greatest novels. Golly, it's just a great book. But he was a real poet. Hey, this is a fact. A friend of mine, Bruce Cook, who used to run an alternative newspaper in Los Angeles, he wrote a book about Jack Kerouac, and the two of them were in a bar in Lowell, Mass. That was his last stop. That's where he died. But Bruce was talking to him, and Kerouac was drunk out of his mind. And suddenly he turned to Bruce, and he pointed his finger into Bruce's chest, and he said, your art is the Holy Ghost blowing through your soul. Then he went on talking about something else, and I never forgot that. In fact, I put it as an inscription in one of my books, you know. But that was Kerouac, you know, and like, you know, Ginsberg. He was, you know, true artist. You know, they did things differently, but.
Yes. Another question that your discussion just now brings up. In your early years, you published several novels, and then there was a drought, and then since then you have been machine-like in your efficiency. However, didn't you have a contract with the publishing house, and why didn't they take it?
No, I didn't. I wish I'd had a contract, but I didn't. No, it's contracts are usually, well, they're hard to get. It's really hard. It's really hard to get somebody to look at your work. And
after you publish 4 novels, it just blows my mind.
Well, it's just the way it is. It's very fickle, and that's. I think that writers, even successful writers, are all going to go through the same cycle. Their work will be praised for a number of years. Then it'll slip. They may go out of print. And then there's a return of interest. It happened with him. How about, you know, F. Scott Fitzgerald? When Fitzgerald died, which was in 1940, he was 44 years old, the the first printing of The Great Gatsby was still on the warehouse shelves. And he went out of print. Nobody was interested in reading about the Jazz Age during the Depression. But now, of course, that novel, The Great Gatsby, is considered one of the best novels in American literature. But same way with Faulkner. I mean, Faulkner was rejected, oh golly, for years and years. He was on the face of Time magazine in 1938. By 1946, he was totally out of print. In 1948, he won the Nobel Prize. You know, the New York Times, I think it was the Times, called him the poet of the Southern dung heap.
Writers write these comeback stories.
Do you remember his comment when he was asked about the reception, or what he said when he received the Nobel Prize? He was on a hunting trip. He was at a deer camp of some kind in Mississippi, and a reporter found him and said, "I think, Mr. Faulkner, you have won the Nobel Prize." And Faulkner said, I don't think that I'm out of print, if you haven't noticed. And the reporter said, "Well, tell you what, Mr. Faulkner, if I could bring that man here and with that Nobel Prize in his hand and have him give it to you, what would you say?" And Faulkner said, "I'd hand the gentleman a dishcloth, or dry." He was washing dishes. He said, "I would hand him a, what do you call it, dry rag or something."
So you have a long-term relationship with Bill Patton, or does he have a relationship with the publisher?
It's with the publisher. I've never met him. No.
Really?
No, I've never met him.
Oh, there's a question back here first.
Yeah, I just wonder how you meet your characters.
That's a good question. The lady said, how does a writer create his characters? I've really never known. I think they live in the unconscious, and I think of it another way as well, that the story is already written, and it's a matter of it's incremental discovery of the story and the people who are in it. I don't know where the characters come from. I never see more than 2 scenes ahead. It's usually during the middle of the night that I see things clearly, and I rise with them in the morning, but that's as far as I can see. This book I just finished, I did not know the ending of it till last Sunday. Sunday morning I did not have the ending, and during the day it came to me, but I've never really felt that I created the story. Hemingway put it better. He said, if he knew the end of a story, so would the reader. And it was pretty good, isn't it? Yeah. But the characters are, they live in the heart of the tree, and the tree becomes the pulp that becomes the paper. But it's something like that. And, the characters take over, or they start running the story. You think they're going one way, but they start doing things on their own. Every writer knows, don't tell the truth about yourself to a psychiatrist. He will have you lobotomized. What's the first question they ask? I don't know if you've ever been to psychiatrists, but psychologists. Do you hear voices? I've heard them all my life, and I always say, no, sir. And my head is solid concrete on that. In fact, I'm deaf and dumb. Do you hear voices? What do you think, for God's sakes?
months before you said that thing about 111 times rejected and stuff. And if you were accepted and they made you re-edit, how did that go? I mean, I find writing a story is much easier than having to go back and edit it.
Well, those are good questions about editing and working with editors and wondering whether or not you got the story right. This is the way I think of it. It's always better to overwrite. You can take things out more easily than put them in. And so it's a matter of deletion. You write it and then you delete and you compress. And I know in my case, sometimes I'll have two sentences and I know that one of them needs to go, or compress the two into one. But brevity and white space can be a writer's best friends, you see. You make the visuality of the story part of the story, part of its structure. For example, you break off the story and start a new chapter. It causes, it incites curiosity in the reader. He wants to turn and continue reading. And that little break also is a way to move. Rather than transition, think in terms of writing for the screen. The screen does not make use of transition. It bleeds into another story. You just simply look at The Godfather. It's, I think, the best movie I've ever seen, certainly. Every scene in it is a complete story. You take it, there's one scene in there during one of the gang wars, and one fellow is explaining how you make meatballs and spaghetti. You remember that scene? And you find yourself fascinated. This guy's a killer. And he's talking, and he finally ends up saying, that's how you make the meatballs. Right? And then let's go out and kill some people now. But for 10 minutes, you're listening to this big fat guy. Probably he smells like a garlic factory. Talking about meatballs.
So I'm Italian. Meatballs are really, really important, I gotta say. I actually, one of the workshops I do uses something you said once about how to start a book, how to start a scene. You said, kick the door in. I know a lot of people, they sort of want to introduce their character, their theme slowly, and I always have it in the back of my mind, kick the door in. So thank you for that. Yes.
In New Iberia Blues, Dave's daughter, Alifair, gets kind of swept up into Hollywood as a screenwriter. And then we referenced In the Electric Mist, which was a film that you did with Tommy Lee Jones. Are there any films in the works that are featuring Dave Robichaux?
Well, it's under contract, put it that way, and that's all I can say. It's not real till it happens, and it's you hope things come together, but it's under contract right now, yeah. But there's a film, an adaptation of a story of mine called Winter Light. It was made into a 30-minute film. It almost won an Oscar. It made the top 10 among the nominees, but it didn't make the top 5. But it's been rewritten as a theatrical feature. Julian Higgins is the director, and the title is God's Country. It's being filmed over by Bozeman. It all came together. The camera hasn't turned yet. But our youngest daughter, is Alifair Burke, and she's published 18 novels. It's been on the New York Times bestseller list many times. And another apocryphal story here. But Alifair her intelligence is not measurable. That's a fact. Only 2 in a million people have her IQ. And I'm not making this up. This has happened, I don't know how many times. She graduated #1 at Stanford Law. She clerked in the Ninth Circuit Court and didn't have to go to class. They just let her clerk and gave her the degree. I tell people this story and there's a pause and they say, "Your wife must be so smart." So the character of Alifair Robichaud, that's Dave's daughter, is of course based on Alifair Burke. She's also a law professor at Hofstra today and lives in the village. And, yeah.
How does she feel about being in your books?
Well, I never asked her.
That's the question I swore I wouldn't ask today, but I sure as heck wondered.
Well, yeah, there's one problem. She has raised this a couple of times. Alifair used to be a name that no one ever heard. My grandmother was named Alifair Holland, and there was an Alifair McCoy. She belonged to the family who fought with the Hatfields. But that's the only time I'd ever seen those names before. Now, people give their dogs the name Alifair, and they think it's a compliment. Ask Pamela. We get this on our website all the time. I married a gorilla. Alifair. My ex-wife, the one that threw me down the stairs, was named Alifair.
Have any of your horses or other animals influenced your writing?
Well, yeah, and that's a great question because animals are full of great stories because when you have animals, you quickly learn they're just like us, and sometimes they're probably better than the rest of us, but there are always great stories in animals, and so I think all my books, the Holland novels are not as successful commercially as the Dave Robichaud books, but I think my three best books, it's a trilogy, are House of the Rising Sun, Wayfaring Stranger, and The Jealous Kind. They're based on real people. I didn't change their names. My mother's family were the Hollands, and they're remarkable people in early Texas pioneers. But I think the story about the animals it's intriguing because we discover, I think, some point in our lives that there is a kingdom of at work around us. We deny it. We kind of impose our way, I think, think of ourselves as superior beings. But then we have to stop and think, my God, what are we doing with the earth? The animals are not destroying it. I think we are. But I think that John Neihart influenced not only my work, but my thinking. And he was my first creative writing teacher. John Neihart wrote Black Hawk Speaks, and he wrote another book called When the Tree Flowered. And it's actually a collection of long stories about the Indian belief that there is no death. There's a passageway in which we enter a valley that is filled with animals and flowers, that these are the first things the person sees as he enters this canyon. And John Neihart was a mystic. He was one of the most intelligent, gifted men I've ever known. Do you know the film Man in the Wilderness, the story of Hugh Glass? And I think, was it Robert Redford that played? I don't remember. The Irish actor, Richard Harris, that's it, played Hugh Glass, story of the mountain men up on the Milk River. That was John Neihart's story. I mean, he wrote the original. He didn't write the screenplay. But he influenced my thinking also about the importance of animals and the reason for their presence, and the fact that we're supposed to be stewards of the earth. You know, I mean, if you read the Old Testament, the first creatures that entered the ark were animals. You know, but and probably we have a place where all animals are welcome. Wolves got to go somewhere else because we have domestic creatures who can't defend themselves. But we've got all kinds of critters, and they're at work early in the morning. The turkeys are in the tank, the stock. They get in the stock tank, and they play pranks. I've got one horse that he'll pull the glove out of the back of my pocket and run off with it. He'll grab my hat and go throw it in a tree. You know, we used to live up at the end of Grant Creek. There was one deer that would wait for me to start cutting the lawn, and then he would run at me and leap past me and make me jump. And then we'd stand there, and we were just laughing. And of course we had this bear named Baby Igor, who I played with our cat. So when people say animals just have instincts, I think it's nonsense. They think and have relationships and loyalties. I don't want to talk y'all to death.
Any other questions? Okay.
Don't you think most writers are just good storytellers?
Well, yeah, they should be, but that's it. There used to be something called the Southern Renaissance, and it lasted from the 1920s into the 1950s. But I believe that Renaissance existed. I mean, think of all the great writers who came out of the South: Robert Penn Warren, Eudora Welty, my heavens. But anyway, I think it's because of the importance of oratory in the Southern fundamentalist churches that people would go to church to get scared. You know, do you ever read Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God by Jonathan Edwards? Oh, gee whiz, you know, you want to go out and you're afraid to shoot yourself because you go straight to hell in the place that just made you shoot yourself. But that was part of the gift, you see, that the Puritans were great storytellers, and those traditions, the traveling preacher, the great oratory. You know, Sam Houston could recite word for word from, without a text, from the Odyssey and the Iliad perfectly for an hour without missing a beat. And frontier audiences would just, he was a very successful politician, Sam Houston, the first president of the Texas Republic. But anyway, it's been great being here with y'all, and I haven't been talking about people who talk. I don't know why. Father Jim Hogan's a good friend of ours, and he's always talked to me about Trappist vows, vows of silence. No, he didn't.
Really appreciate you taking so much time with us today. It has been a privilege.
Thank you. Thank Miss Gwen too. She's been a great host and a good friend. And thank y'all.